When Ethiopia announced in 2006 that it would restore thousands of hectares of forest without planting a single tree, the world exploded with laughter. A green utopia for the desperate, mocked the Washington Post. They might as well move to the Sahara, scoffed a Brussels official. A German ecologist published an article titled, "Why Ethiopia is Mars on Earth." The world knew the supposed truth. This was one of the poorest nations on the planet, where only the death wind howled, where over 1,000 people died every day from hunger and related diseases, and where the desert devoured the last patches of life like a tank advance. What are they going to do? Grow trees out of thin air, laughed the experts. Talk to stumps? Maybe they're friends with the sand too? Chimed in their colleagues. CNN ran stories about mad African plans to revive stones. BBC filmed documentaries about how poverty leads to hallucinations. And here these people were, saying they would grow a forest by speaking to dead stumps. It seemed despair had stripped them of their last ounce of reason. But 10 years later, the same planet stood frozen in silent confusion. Because where NASA satellites once saw a brown ulcer of death, there now stood a real forest, green, alive, breathing. A forest no one had planted. This isn't a story of survival. It's a story of resurrection. Long ago, Ethiopia was paradise on earth. Not metaphorically, literally. The ancients called it the Garden of Eden, and they had reason to. Imagine, 2/3 of the country, a territory larger than France, was covered in forests thicker than the Amazon. Roman legionnaires wrote home about mountains green to the clouds. Travelers described forests so dense the midday sun couldn't reach the forest floor. Lions roared in the thickets 3 kilometers above sea level, where now only rocks and bones remain. Elephant herds carved trails between 1,000-year-old baobab giants. Waterfalls with a honeyed taste crashed down from heights like skyscrapers, their rumble echoing for miles. Leopards hunted in the crowns of trees older than Roman aqueducts. Women never knew drought. Springs gushed from every crack year-round. Children splashed in streams that never dried, catching fish with bare hands in crystal-clear pools. Elders sat in the shade of trees older than the pyramids, telling stories to the symphony of 1,000 birds. Bees built hives the size of houses, but slowly, paradise began to die at the hands of man. The catastrophe came like an avalanche in slow motion, creeping but inevitable. First, they cut down trees along roads, easier to haul away. Then it was the mountain slopes. Then the sacred groves their ancestors had protected like their own eyes, places of ancestral burial and spiritual worship. Each morning, the mountains awoke to the scream of chainsaws. Thousands of people marched with axes, as if to war with nature itself. 500-year-old patriarch trees fell in mere hours. The ground trembled as if from an earthquake. Trucks loaded with giant trunks formed endless funeral processions to cities, where the wood became furniture for the rich. Within a single generation, forests that had witnessed the time of the Queen of Sheba were gone. By the mid-20th century, Ethiopia had lost half its greenery. By 1982, only 3% of the country's forest cover remained. Less than the Sahara. Without trees, the land turned into a sieve. Rain no longer nourished roots, but ran off in torrents, washing away the last crumbs of fertility into the ocean. Rivers that had flowed since the time of dinosaurs became dry, rocky scars in just a decade. The wind kicked up dust clouds, visible from space. Ethiopia had become a ghastly brown ulcer on the green map of Africa. Temperatures rose by 3 degrees. The rainy season shrank from 6 months to just 1. Lakes that had existed for millions of years began to dry up, leaving behind only salt flats. Animals fled or died painful deaths. Birds stopped returning in spring. The Great Silence arrived, a terrifying, lifeless hush where once the orchestra of life played. The world remembered Ethiopia through horrifying images that seared into the retina of the planet. The 1980s, skeleton children with saucer-sized eyes filled only with emptiness. Mothers, now walking shadows, rocking babies that looked like tiny birds. Mile-long lines for grain under the scorching sun of a dead land. Mothers carried their dead infants for hundreds of kilometers to bury them in the soil that gave them life. Entire villages became ghost towns in weeks. People simply left and never returned. Farmers found their cows mummified beside dried-out wells, their bones bleaching in the sun as a grim warning. At the peak of the famine, the land claimed thousands of lives in a single day. In 3 years, the famine devoured a population the size of Munich. International journalists flew in to film the African hell, and flew back to their cozy studios to broadcast the horror to the world. But this disaster was no random tragedy. It was a sentence handed down by the planet itself for decades of barbarism. Mad deforestation had turned the country into a lunar desert. Ethiopia lost 1 billion tons of fertile soil every year, more than the weight of all of the Netherlands. Winds scattered it across the globe, from the Amazon jungle to the glaciers of Antarctica, like the ashes of a fallen green paradise. The fragile balance of the ecosystem collapsed like a house of cards. Rain stopped falling where it had for thousands of years. Streams became cracks yawning open like wounds in the earth. Crops withered before they could ripen. Farmers, whose families had lived off the land for centuries, now harvested grain for only 1 month instead of a full year. The desert advanced like a military blitzkrieg, 50,000 hectares a year. In the highlands, where treetops once rustled, only sandstorms howled now. Farmers abandoned the ravaged fields of their grandfathers, leaving only the graves of their ancestors. Livestock died of thirst, pressing their snouts into the cracked clay of what were once ponds. The government evacuated entire provinces. Roads teemed with caravans of refugees, nearly dead souls wandering nowhere with bundles on their backs. International experts delivered a brutal verdict. By the year 2000, Ethiopia would become an uninhabitable desert. It seemed this land had forever forgotten how to live. The first rescue attempts failed with spectacular cosmic-level futility. Billions of dollars in foreign aid literally vanished into the sand. Kind-hearted Europeans shipped in seedlings from their nurseries, only for them to blacken and die within a week under the African sun. They built dams from the finest concrete, only to be washed away by the first rains. They dug wells with German precision, but they dried up within a month. Armies of experts from the world's top universities arrived in white jeeps, studied the land, and delivered their unanimous verdict. The soil was dead forever. A professor from Heidelberg even wrote a paper titled "Why Ethiopia is Mars on Earth" and received a prestigious academic award for it. So when, in 2006, the Ethiopian government announced its incredible plan to restore forests without planting a single tree, the world reacted as if someone had claimed they were flying to the moon in a hot air balloon. A green utopia for desperate minds, scoffed the Washington Post. An African fantasy on the verge of madness, echoed The Guardian. Are they going to sing lullabies to the sand? Joked a French scholar at a Sorbonne conference. CNN aired segments on insane plans to revive rocks with prayer. A BBC filmed documentaries about how extreme poverty pushes people into hallucination. They think they can talk to dead stumps, quipped scholars in tweed jackets. The world held a simple truth to be self-evident. Nothing grows in the desert, period. But luckily, the Earth turned out to be wiser than humans. In 1983, in the scorched desert of faraway Niger, a discovery occurred that changed everything. Tony Rinaldo, an Australian agronomist, was a young idealist determined to save the vast Sahel region, the arid zone between the Sahara and the African savannas. From desertification, he came to Africa like a knight in shining armor, almost ready to fight the ruthless desert single-handedly. For years, he planted trees with the zeal of a fanatic. His organization spent millions on saplings, fertilizers, and irrigation systems. Each year, they planted 6,000 trees. Each year, 5,500 of them died. Locals nicknamed him the Crazy White Farmer. Children giggled watching him water dead sticks under the 55 degrees Celsius sun, talking to them like they were his children. The desert was merciless and mocking. Gale force winds uprooted saplings like matchsticks. The sun scorched them within a day. Sand buried them overnight. Then one day, while changing a flat tire on a dusty road in the middle of a drought, when even scorpions were hiding deep underground, Tony noticed something odd. At the roadside grew what he thought was a weed. Out of professional curiosity, he bent down for a closer look and froze. It was the stump of an old tree, alive, with roots, desperately trying to grow. From what seemed to be a dead trunk, dozens of tiny green shoots were sprouting, like the fingers of a drowning man reaching for the light. Like a silent scream echoing through time. In that moment, a switch flipped in Tony's mind. He realized he'd been solving the wrong problem all these years. The key wasn't to plant new trees, it was to find a way to awaken the old ones. Beneath the layers of sand and ash, the root systems of trees cut down decades ago were still alive. They reached more than 30 meters deep, tapping into underground water, untouched by the drought. They had been waiting. They remembered what it meant to be a forest. They were sleeping, but not dead. This gave birth to the technique called FMNR, Farmer-Managed Natural Regeneration. The secret turned out to be laughably simple. When a stump produces dozens of weak shoots, you leave only 3 to 4 of the strongest. All the energy of the ancient root system is then funneled into these few, instead of being wasted on many. The result? A shoot grows several centimeters per month. In a year, you get a small human-sized tree. In 3, a full canopy. Since 1983, this quiet experiment in Niger, with just 10 farmers, slowly gained momentum. By the early 2000s, the method had spread across hundreds of thousands of hectares, a solid result for the drylands of the Sahel. Tree density grew from 4 per hectare to 20. Millet and sorghum yields increased by nearly 20%. Bushes, young trees, and livestock fodder began to appear. Locals were satisfied. Children no longer starved during the dry season, and women spent less time searching for firewood. But it was still just a drop in the ocean of the Sahel. By 2005, the U.S. Geological Survey had recorded vegetation recovery on roughly 3 million hectares, an impressive figure, but still a tiny fraction of the 200 million hectare Sahel region. Most experts viewed Niger's success as a one-off, a local miracle that couldn't be scaled. Tony Rinaldo and his team knew the harsh reality. It was one thing to work in relatively mild Niger, with its 500 millimeters of annual rainfall. Ethiopia was a whole other beast, scorched, cracked, and dry for 8 to 10 months straight. In Niger, it at least drizzled occasionally to keep the soil moist. In Ethiopia, the earth was harder than asphalt, with temperatures often hitting 50 degrees Celsius. Air humidity was under 10%. Winds blew like hurricanes, drying out any greenery in hours. Then came 2006. Against all odds, Ethiopia decided to test this crazy Niger idea on a national scale. The world erupted in laughter. If Niger managed to restore just a pathetic fraction of desert land in 23 years, what could they possibly do in Ethiopia's hellscape, wrote Nature. The climate difference is enormous. It's like comparing a greenhouse to the surface of Mars, declared climate scientists from MIT. Niger at least has a rainy season. Ethiopia has only a season of death, sneered a French ecologist at a Paris conference. Then, in the Humbo district, plagued by famine for 30 years, rumors of the crazy white farmer from Niger and his magical method began to spread. 7 communities decided to try Tony Ronaldo's idea. They had no choice, only a horrible, hungry death or a miracle. Humbo was called a lunar landscape. The hills were as bald as a newborn's skull, not a single tree on the horizon, just rocks and dust stretching to the sky. The soil had hardened into concrete. You could chop it with an axe. Children didn't know what shade was, except for that of their crumbling homes. Women walked 15 kilometers a day for water, returning with clay jars on their heads beneath the stars after the brutal heat had faded. The people embraced FMNR with the desperation of the condemned. They fenced off the deadest areas with barbed wire. They stopped cutting what looked like weeds. They began trimming weak shoots with sharp knives, nurturing the strong ones like their own children. They protected the young trees from goats and livestock that ate anything green. And they waited, praying to every god they knew. For weeks, nothing happened. The land stayed silent. Many began to doubt. Maybe the experts were right, and they really had gone mad. But the elders insisted. The land has slept for 30 years. Give it time to wake up. And then, 3 months later, a miracle happened. The first results appeared like a gift from heaven. Tiny green dots on the brown canvas of death, like stars in a night sky. Children ran from shrub to shrub, counting every new sprout. Women cried with joy, kissing the first leaves. After 6 months, shrubs up to the waist. After a year, young growth rustled in the wind. After 3 years, people didn't recognize their homeland, where once was desert. Young trees now stood green and proud. NASA recorded a true phenomenon from space, a green patch growing in the middle of the desert at a rate of 10 hectares per month. Scientists checked the data again and again. They had never seen anything like it. Satellites don't lie. By 2020, the Humbo forest had absorbed nearly 3 million tons of carbon dioxide, more than what a small European country emits in a year. It became the first project in Africa to sell carbon credits on the international market. The communities received $500,000, more money than they had seen in their entire history. Crop yields skyrocketed. Farmers who once harvested 3 sacks of grain from their fields were now collecting 15 from the same plot. New sources of income appeared: honey from wild bees that returned from nowhere, medicinal herbs, building materials, fodder for livestock. People who had spent their lives fighting to survive began, for the first time, to plan for their children's future. But the most unbelievable change happened with water. In the mountains around Humbo, 13 springs had once flowed. They all dried up in the 1980s. Elders remembered them as places of childhood games and women's conversations, where girls learned to braid and boys caught frogs. But for 30 years, they had been nothing but dusty pits overgrown with thorns. Geologists declared the water gone forever, the aquifers depleted beyond repair. But the trees knew better than the geologists. As FMNR worked its miracles, something magical was happening underground. The soil beneath the new canopies became a sponge. Rain no longer ran off in torrents, washing fertility to distant seas. It soaked in, seeped down, quietly reviving aquifers that had slept for decades. Then, the springs began to return. First, tiny trickles after the rain, disappearing within an hour. Then, they flowed longer. Then, a whole day. Then, a week. Then, they didn't dry up, even during the harshest dry season. The water was cold and clear, like tears of joy from the earth itself. Today, 6 of the 13 springs flow year-round like geysers. You can hear them gurgling from a kilometer away, a true song of resurrected land. Children who had never seen running water now splash in streams, learning to swim in the ponds. Women who once walked half a day along rocky trails for water now fill buckets 5 minutes from home. No wells were dug, no pumps installed, no pipelines laid. People simply gave nature a chance to remember how to live. 10 years later, the BBC returned to Hunbo to film the next chapter of the story. The crew got lost on the very first day. The cameraman turned in disbelief. The place he remembered as a lunar crater had become a jungle. GPS confirmed the coordinates, but his eyes refused to believe them. Where once the land stretched naked to the horizon, now you couldn't see more than 10 meters ahead through the dense green. Where once the wind howled through stones, now a symphony of birds and the rustle of leaves. Children born after the project began don't believe their parents' stories of a desert. They know only the shade of trees, the song of birds, the sound of running water. When shown old photos, they ask, "Is this Mars?" and wonder, how could people live in such hell? Experts now silently rewrite textbooks. Universities that mocked FMNR as shamanism are opening faculties of natural regeneration. Professors from Harvard and Oxford line up to study primitive methods from African farmers. The story of Humbo spread across Africa like a virus of hope. FMNR began to spread faster than an epidemic. In West Africa alone, already 15 million hectares of restored land. In Mali, 70% of families no longer know hunger. In Kenya, incomes have risen by 40%. In Senegal, children see antelopes for the first time in years. The method's cost is laughable. $40 per hectare versus $18,000 for traditional reforestation. Survival rate, 90% versus 20% for imported saplings. Chinese scientists now come to study this African magic and adapt it for the deserts of Gansu. Indians test it in Rajasthan, Mexicans in Sonora, Brazilians use it to restore the Cerrado. Australian Aboriginals are reviving their bushland after fires, using ancestral wisdom. The World Economic Forum has announced the Trillion Tree Program. The UN declared 2021 to 2030 the decade on ecosystem restoration, and FMNR became a key technology in saving the planet. Tony Ronaldo received the Alternative Nobel Prize. In Davos, he is listened to like a prophet. His book, The Forest Underground, has been translated into 20 languages. The man once called the crazy farmer is now the one who whispers to forests. NASA confirmed the sensation. Despite the horrifying deforestation of the Amazon, Earth's overall green cover is growing. And Africa is leading the miracle. In just 15 years, Ethiopia restored forest cover over an area larger than Belgium. A country that once lost 1 million hectares per year now restores 500,000 annually. It's the fastest ecosystem recovery in history. The regional climate is visibly changing. The rainy season grew from 2 months to 4. Temperatures dropped by 2 degrees. Humidity rose by 1/3. Birds unseen for 50 years returned. Eagles, storks, sunbirds. Fatima from Humbo now exports honey to Europe, 2 tons a year from plants her grandmother thought extinct. The bees believed in the resurrection of the forest before the people did. She smiles. holding jars of golden honey. Demesu gives tours to delegations from 40 countries and shows them the stump where it all began, the gnarled remnant of a tree cut down by his grandfather in the 1960s. Today, it's a giant with a canopy that shelters 100 people. My grandfather killed the tree. I brought it back. My grandson will eat its fruit, he tells each group. 89-year-old elder Abebe sits every morning beneath the tree he helped grow and weeps with joy. I thought I would die without seeing the green hills of my childhood. But the land turned out to be more patient and wiser than us. Today, as our planet burns in climate catastrophe and experts speak of irreversible processes, Ethiopia's incredible rebirth sounds like an anthem of hope. If the poorest country could resurrect dead lands with nothing but bare hands, what can all of us do together? This experience is now spreading to 27 countries, from Kenya and Mali to India, Australia, and Mexico, from Laos to Argentina. The seeds of an idea planted in the dust of an African village are now sprouting across all continents. 30 years from now, children will play in these forests. Children who will not believe that this was once desert. And when they are shown photos from 2006, they will ask, "Why did you wait so long to begin?" Ethiopia did not plant a single tree, but it grew hope for an entire planet. It proved a simple truth. Beneath every desert, a forest sleeps, waiting for someone to help it awaken. And if you ever doubt the power of human faith, remember this story. Remember the people who didn't give up when the whole world laughed at them. Remember the land that remembered how to be alive and waited for someone to believe in miracles. Now look out your window. Perhaps beneath the soil around you too, a forest is sleeping, waiting for your belief. If impoverished Ethiopia could bring back life with bare hands, what stops each of us from saving at least our yard, our street, our country?